What if I approached this journey with blood cancer with a kind of a growth mindset, a sense of discovery, a beginner's attitude, And it dawned on me right there, plain as day, because I took time for granted. I took people and relationships for granted. If not now, when? I don't have forever. There's very unlikely that you're going to become rich and famous over the art that you produce, whether it's music, graphic arts, visual arts, a written word, what have you. You probably aren't going to become rich and famous. Do it first for yourself. Does it bring you joy? Does it bring you peace of mind? Does it bring you satisfaction and the like? And then share it with others. One thing I like to tell storytellers is, just like I told my buddy Tom, I grabbed him on the shoulders before the first book, is if not now, when?
Stories and Stanza is a podcast exploring creativity, resilience, and the transformative power of human stories. Through our 2 series, Between the Lines with creators and Fail With Me, focusing on wellness and life's challenges, we bring you authentic conversations with inspiring voices from around the world. If you are drawn to meaningful dialogue that both comforts and challenges, follow us on YouTube or any podcast platform. Hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Stories and Stanza. Today we are joined by our guest Ray Hartjen. Hi Ray, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
It's nice to meet you, Ambara. I appreciate the opportunity and looking forward to our conversation. And so now it's finally great to be on the show and looking forward to our talk.
I'm looking forward to talking to you as well. For anyone who has joined us for the first time, I run 2 different series. The one is called Between the Lines, where we speak to writers about their craft, and another is called Fail With Me, where we talk to people with authentic stories of wellness, mental health, emotional intelligence. Now, today is a very interesting situation. We will be talking about your book, Ray, and then if we have time, and we will see that how the 2 segments kind of connect and how you are a speaker on both the topics. So for our listeners, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
My name is Ray Hartjen. I'm a writer and a musician. I live in Southern California in a town called Mission Viejo. I spend my days creating, whether it be the written word or through music, and then throwing it out there for people to see if they like it or not. And hopefully they like it.
And today we will be talking about your new book that has come out this week. When we speak to writers on this show, what I try to explore is give readers an intimate sort of place to get to know the writer. Are his inspirations? What are his messaging? What are his challenges? What are his writing disciplines? The broad brush try to cover on the Between the Lines segment. To get started, can you tell us a little bit about your writing journey?
I have been a writer for most of my professional career. I was a marketer for a long time, a public relations person as well. And through those aspects of my professional career, it was really about storytelling. Before I was a writer, I was really a storyteller. How do I tell the story to potential customers and to media people about the products, services, and experiences for companies that I worked for? A big one was Sony Electronics out of Japan. And so I was a storyteller, and I just got involved more and more in writing, particularly when it came to content marketing throughout 2010 and beyond. So I still do that, Umbro, for freelance clients. But, as I started writing, kind of short form, be it, blog posts, articles, and ebooks, and the like, I started wondering if I could challenge myself. Could I write long form content like a book? And my first book was published. I have 6 now. The one that just came out this week is a novel. It's called The Iranian Fiasco. My first book that came out was a nonfiction book called Immaculate, How the Steelers Saved Pittsburgh. And that came out in December of 2022. I just became passionate about telling long form stories in books. I started out writing nonfiction. My first 4 books were nonfiction books. And to tell you the truth, I kind of felt like a little bit like an imposter, like a bit of a fraud, because I read maybe 40, 50 books a year, and all but 1 or 2 of them are fiction books. I like to read novels, and here I was a writer of nonfiction books. And so I wondered to myself, could I venture forth and write the great American novel, so to speak, as a kind of a bit of a cliche. And so I set out and did write a novel. That was published at the end of October of 2025. And it was received well enough by readers that it encouraged me to write a second one, so create kind of a mini series. And so that's my sixth book, my second novel, The Iranian Fiasco. It was published on April 7th and is available wherever books are sold around the world.
Amazing. And I would like to say to our listeners that we will put the book link in the episode description, whether you are watching it on YouTube or you are listening it into an audio podcast app. So feel free to check out the book if this interview speaks to you. And my attempt in this space is to amplify the voice of the writer and get you a chance to know your writer before buying the book. You mentioned something very interesting, that you started off with nonfiction and then slowly transitioned into creative long-form writing. And I wanted to hear your journey on that in a little bit better, because both are very different preparations, very different kind of messaging. And I would like to hear from you as in what was your approach, what worked for you?
3 years prior to the publication of that first book, Immaculate: How the Steelers Saved Pittsburgh, I was diagnosed with a blood cancer called multiple myeloma. And multiple myeloma is a incurable blood cancer, but it's treatable. Once I started going through treatment, I came through a lot of self-realization discoveries. You know, when I was first diagnosed, I was told that I would go through an induction therapy. And then within 3 to 6 months, I would go through a stem cell transplant. And so I was thinking, hey, man, I'm an overachiever. I'm going to do, 6 months to a stem cell transplant? No way. I'll do it in 3 months. 3 months, I'll do it. And I'm going to be the best cancer patient ever, man. I'm going to be in tip-top physical condition. I want to watch my diet. And so for the first 2 weeks of my diagnosis, here I was, working out, working on my physical conditioning, cleaning up my diet, getting ready for my stem cell transplant. It was about 10 or 11 days after my diagnosis. It was a Friday night, and my wife, Lori, and I went out to dinner with our son, Raymond. We were at a restaurant, and overall, I was so exhausted, I couldn't even read the menu. I mean, I was just beaten. It came to me a realization that my whole being, my whole self is more than just my physical being. There was the emotional component, the mental component, the spiritual component, and the like. And I had neglected some components just thinking about my physical conditioning. And I was just exhausted and I was tired. And, I looked upon that, a couple of days later as like, I just learned something about myself. I knew that subconsciously, I think I knew I was more than just my physical being. But it took a discovery and being able to articulate it in my mind. And so when I realized that I learned something about myself there, I asked myself again, what else could I learn? What if I approached this journey with blood cancer with a kind of a growth mindset, a sense of discovery, a beginner's attitude, And one thing I revisited was exercise. It's called the timeline exercise, where you just look at a timeline between your birth and your death, and you kind of, where do you believe you fall within that timeline? I used to facilitate that type of exercise within my professional career as part of a time management class that I taught. And I revisited that, and I realized, my little spot on my timeline was a little further to the right than I had initially, maybe thought it was based on my diagnosis. And so I started, thinking about that, and what it meant to me, and what the realization came was that, I was like a lot of people, I probably took time for granted too often, right? And so then I asked, how did that present itself in your life? If you took time for granted, how did it present itself? And it dawned on me right there, plain as day, because I took time for granted, I took people and relationships for granted. So then continuing on my train of thought, what am I going to do about that? Right? You got some pithy saying in the back, saying on the back of a t-shirt, if not now, when? Looking at my timelines, what are the things I want to do? Who do I want to do it with? And let's start doing it now. If not now, when? I don't have forever. And, it was that kind of motto that was running through my head as I was talking to one of my friends. His name's Tom Olenek. He's from Pittsburgh, and he grew up with the Pittsburgh Steelers, and he grew up with Pittsburgh, the city of Pittsburgh's very painful deindustrialization transformation in the 70s and 80s. It was his idea for the book. And he had talked about this book for decades. He talked about it with me for over 10 years. And so practicing what I was preaching. If not now, when? I grabbed Tom by the shoulders and I was like, hey, no, Tom, if not now, when? Let's get started on this book, and I'm the writer here. Let me work on writing the book. And if we should ever, veer off of your vision, we can course correct. We never had to course correct. In 18 months, we had the book ready. It went out, published by Morgan James, and it was super successful. And by kind of reframing my life around the things that I wanted to do, things that are important to me, and the people that were most important to me, it got me to publishing that first book. But that wasn't the only story that I wanted to tell. I wanted to tell the story about how that came about. So I wrote my second book called Me, Myself, and My Multiple Myeloma. It's a cancer patient memoir, and hopefully it's a resource for the patient community, caregivers, and their allies, right? Once I got done with that book, there were other stories. I wanted to tell the story about the Indianapolis 500. So I wrote a book about that. And then at the end of the Indy 500 book, I was thinking, man, I want to write a novel. I read novels. So how come could I write a book that I would want to read? And I think I could, right? I'm a storyteller. So why not give it a try? The first novel evolved from that. It's called Outflanked. It's an espionage thriller. And then the sixth book coming out just a few days ago called The Iranian Fiasco. It's a book I started last year in July. I can thank, I guess, the current United States, administration for making the book the theme a hot topic in today's news. So I think it's the first time I ever can have thanked the current United States political administration. But they're keeping the title relevant in the news. Anyways, that book, The Iranian Fiasco, is a follow-up, follows up 3 weeks later after the end of the first novel, Outflanked. But that's kind of been my evolution, I'm not even going to call it a trauma, because my diagnosis, it may have been a bit of traumatic at the moment. It was just another pivot, another transition point in my life, but it led to a period of reflection and self-discovery. And that self-discovery allowed me to learn new things, to unlearn things maybe I needed to let go of, and to relearn things that were kind of foundational. And with that kind of pointed me into a new direction, a direction that I find so much more fulfilling, and that is, working for myself as a writer and as a musician.
The reason why I asked that question is I don't see it as one right answer to a right question. So everyone's perspective is different. Everyone's creative pathway is different and interesting. And when a writer looks back and reflects on their own journey, what made them the writer they are today, I find that fascinating and full of human stories, inspirations, and everything. And what you share.
Yeah, the writer I am today gets better and better. The more I write, I think the better I get. And, the more I read, the better writer I become as well. I can look at other books, even articles, and see the flow of the story. I think that's kind of almost human nature in a way. We like stories. We beg our parents when we're children to tell us a story, right? We like things presented to us in a story format. And so the more stories I consume as a reader or as a viewer or what have you, a listener, the more stories I consume, the more I practice storytelling, the better storyteller I become. And the better storyteller I am, the better writer I am.
That is beautiful. And yes, we are always looking for stories. And we will explore your books in a little bit more detail. But before that, I wanted to hear from you that you shared your inward journey when you realized that you have so many stories to tell, and you focused on your awareness and your mindset, and you started your preparations and publishing. Have you ever kind of asked yourself, what is it that you are trying to say through your work, be it nonfiction, be it fiction?
I think it depends on the story, right? For example, the memoir that I wrote, Me, Myself, and My Multiple Myeloma, I wanted it to be a resource for patients. When I was first diagnosed, soon after that dinner with my son and my wife, I realized there was more I could learn. So I went to a support group, the first support group I ever went to. And it was a support group made up of patients of a variety of types of cancers. I was overwhelmed, really, about seeing the strength of these brave cancer fighters in this room. And they kind of taught taught me what it was like to be a cancer patient. From that moment on, I was like, man, I want to be like them. They're role models for me. I want to be an advocate for patients, for caregivers, and their allies. I feel good. I feel strong. And as I feel good and as I feel strong, is there something I can do to help others within our community? If somebody needs a hand to pull them forward to where they want to be, I want to be that person to offer that hand. And so that led me to that second book. And my intent for what did I want to share there was, you can't write a memoir, particularly a memoir about your health, without just being brutally honest, And I needed to tell my story. The motivation for me was like, this is what happened to me. This is how I felt. And this is what it was like, what I sincerely, honestly remember it to be like during this journey. I wanted to share that with patients and their caregivers and their allies and be brutally honest, And so it wasn't, I want to do it in a way that, people will enjoy reading, of course, but it was the aspect of, like, hey, this is a no holds barred look at what it's like to be a patient of blood cancer. This is what, if you are newly diagnosed, what you can expect. If you're caring for somebody, this is what you can expect and what the person you're caring for might expect, and so on. And that's a lot different, I think, than, say one of the fiction books I've written, where at, that point in time, I'm just trying to entertain. Right? Some people like to read, some people like to watch, some people like to listen, and so on. But for the readers of that particular genre, that I like spy novels, and military novels and things like that, thrillers, action, adventure. So I wanted to tell that story, but I have to do it in an entertaining way, right? And so for me, the motivations are, how can I tell a story that would entertain me? I'm a fan of the genre. So what are the types of stories I like? How can I create something new in the space and share that with folks? And the primary motivation, I think, for all creatives is creating an art that satisfies themselves internally. When I speak with other writers, particularly people who feel as though they want to become a writer, they feel as though they have stories to share, the first thing I say is do it for yourself. There's very unlikely that you're going to become rich and famous over the art that you produce, whether it's music, graphic arts, visual arts, a written word, what have you. You probably aren't going to become rich and famous. Do it first for yourself. Does it bring you joy? Does it bring you peace of mind? Does it bring you satisfaction and the like? And then share it with others. Some creatives don't share it at all. They journal. They keep a journal. They keep it to themselves, and no one ever sees it. There's a kind of a catharsis just for writing things down, right? I've met poets who have tons of poetry, but they haven't shared it with anybody yet. They're just kind of like, for whatever reason, keeping it inside. So for, the motivation, I think that the most authentic, the most organic type of motivation for any creative is, again, that desire to get something out, be it paint on a canvas, words on a page, or what have you. It's that burning desire inside them to create, and to create something that they like and that they want to create.
And the reason for asking that is that there are a lot of writing in today's world. Like, publication has gone easy, and there are many writers, and on the same subject there are many books. So it is important for us to understand, why are we writing, what are we writing, who are we writing it for. And you put it beautifully that we are probably never going to be rich from writing, but are we content from our writing? Are we happy? Are we satisfied deeply in that process?
Writing music, write something that you like, whether you think it's beautiful, sinister, thrilling, exciting, sedate, what have you. You create that song in you. But, one of the things that's always interested me is like, well, let's share that song with others. I think it's a thrilling song. Do you find it thrilling? Do you find it stimulating, or do you find it sedate and different? But, all those adjectives I used are positive adjectives, right? It's, this is, what I think of something, what do you think of something? It's not necessarily bad. It's just, perhaps different. But, I enjoy creating. I enjoy telling stories. Songs are little stories to me. Songs are, 3 minutes and 20 seconds a story. Verse, chorus, bridge, another chorus, boom, there you go. Different than the book, but it's still fundamentally sort of the same, creating a story, sharing a story, and then gauging reactions. It's super rewarding when people like the art.
Absolutely. To give our listeners an idea about the new book, can I request you to share something from the book? Can you read something? And it could be anything of your choice.
Yeah, you surprised me by asking the question. But what I thought would be kind of interesting was really kind of the first maybe couple of pages of the new book. The new book is called the Iranian Fiasco, and I'll start off with like the first couple of minutes of it, if that's okay with you.
Yeah,
Shall I
absolutely.
start?
Yeah, sure.
All right. Tiger Swanson had never been a sound sleeper, and her nights became substantially more restless after she joined the Central Intelligence Agency as an operative in Ground Branch of the Special Activities Center. It was difficult to sleep when her head was turning with thoughts, and working for the agency certainly filled one's head with thoughts. This night was another one of those nights, amplified by the fact that she was in a new house. After years of bouncing from one temporary living space to another, a sort of Airbnb vagabond, she had finally committed to signing a year-long lease, occupying a one-bedroom guest house bungalow of an old manor in Old Town, Alexandria, Virginia, tucked along the Potomac River and just a 30-minute jaunt up the George Washington Memorial Parkway to the agency's front gates in Langley. Just her third night in her new place, Tiger thought it must be her new environment that was making her restless. After all, she was enduring a patch of relative downtime at the agency with no active operations on the docket and none visible on the short-term horizon. This should be the time to catch up on rest, she thought, rather than rely on complete exhaustion set in while in the field. I guess that's what adrenaline junkies get, she mumbled as she got out of her brand new queen-size Casper bed delivered just a day ago. Maybe I should try the floor or the backyard. She reached down and picked up a folding carambit knife, absent-mindedly flipping it open and inserting her index finger in the hole at the bottom of the handle. Carambit knives dated back to the 11th century, originating in Indonesia and Southeast Asia as a curved-edge farming tool. Over the centuries, as a tool, it had evolved to much more sinister uses. Some people had worry stones to fiddle with while in thought. Tiger had a carambit. Tiger liked to twirl the carambit around as she thought, and this particular knife was a cold steel manufactured Tiger Claw, given to her as a gift by Devin Thomas, the agency's deputy director of operations and Tiger's ultimate boss. Tiger spun the knife on its razor-sharp, plain-edged, 3.5-inch hawkbill blade repeatedly as she shuffled her bare feet along the hardwood floors and out of her bedroom. Moonlight slipped in to the back windows that opened out to the Potomac and guided her through the living room, equipped with one of her very few household possessions, a square throw rug she had picked up from Wayfair. She leaned onto the counter that separated the kitchen from the living room in the renovated open space floor plan and debated firing up her most prized newly acquired possession, her Breville Barista Express Impress and espresso machine. Before pushing the power button, she looked at her watch and saw it was only 3:12 a.m. She turned around and leaned the small of her back on the counter, wondering what she should do with herself. Maybe a drink of water, and back to bed, she muttered to herself. But before she took her first step, a movement from outside in her peripheral vision caught her attention. Glancing in that direction, she first noticed the reflection of moonlight off a glass object. In the fraction of a second, she recognized it as a red dot reflex sight mounted to the claw mount atop a Heckler & Koch MP5 submachine gun, carried by a man dressed fully in black tactical gear, including a face mask and a lightweight helmet.
I think it builds the moment very well.
Thank you for saying that.
You mentioned that this is your second book in the series. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what happened in the first book? Is this a continuation or is this more of an individual plot?
Yeah, it's not a continuation of the same story. It's a continuation of the same cast of characters, right? So, when I first started writing the first book, it's called Outflanked. I wanted it to be different in the genre. And typically in the genre, your protagonist is some young male, like almost a superhero in some aspects, right? And I'm like, what if we had somebody different? And so the protagonist of my first book is a man named Cal McHenry. He's a 58-year-old professional soldier. He spent, nearly 48 years with the U.S. Army. And now he works as a contractor, private military contractor for Tiger Swanson, the person who I just introduced you to in the opening to the Iranian Fiasco. So I have this 58-year-old soldier, ex-soldier, as one protagonist, but I also wanted to have a strong lead female character as well. And so I introduced this character named Lily Swanson, but she's a very tough person. She's not a princess that needs rescuing. This is a princess that's perfectly capable of saving herself. Doesn't need a knight in shining armor. And so, in her backstory, borrowing from the McKinsey brothers, the Canadian comedy duo, a tough flower. Her name was Lily Swanson, but, Lily's a flower, but she's tougher than that. She's a tough flower, like a tiger lily. So her nickname is Tiger. So I have these two characters, Cal McHenry and Tiger Swanson, who work together. The first book, Outflanked, it really hops around the globe to a lot of different locations, all around a central theme of good versus evil, really, I guess, ultimately. The second book, The Iranian Fiasco, doesn't hop around the globe too much, does start out in the United States. Most of the time takes place through the deserts of Iran as Tiger and her team try to complete a mission and then escape the country.
Wonderful. Since the first book is received well, I wish the second book all the success in the continuation once again.
Yeah, my father was a career military officer in the United States Army. He's also a writer, and he is my first beta reader, right? And so he likes the second book better than the first book. He thought the first book was good. He thinks the second book is better. So I'm hoping readers think the second book is better as well. Hopefully we're getting better as we go along.
This is a very interesting, real world political aspects, the suspense, the thrill, geopolitics. There's so many elements that possibly contributed to the second book. Would you like to share anything with our audience today? What was the preparation like? Did you have to research? Did you have to speak to people? Did you have to go to libraries? Did you watch a lot of documentaries? How did you work on this one?
When you listened to my description, you saw that I got into some detail about some things, the manufacturing of the knife, the gun that Tiger saw outside her window, the sight that was on top of the gun. I got motivation from reading the old Tom Clancy books back in the 80s and 90s. Tom Clancy wrote books like The Hunt for Red October, incredibly detailed and well-researched, right? And I always admired that. I wanted to write my books in the style of a Tom Clancy thriller. But, knowing that things have changed in the publishing industry in 40 years, right? A Tom Clancy book is probably well over 200,000 words, I think. Publishers don't publish books like that anymore. The publisher of my nonfiction books is Morgan James, and they have a hard line limit at 300 pages. It's like, if you have a 300-page book, bookstores don't want to carry something that's over 300 pages. They will do whatever it takes to take a 305-page book and turn it into a 299-page book. The average size of a novel these days, I think, is around 65,000 words, right? I'm trying to write a Tom Clancy type of book with a lot of detail, but make it somewhat condensed compared to a book that he would have written 30, 40 years ago, right? I have so much admiration for writers who did comprehensive books like Tom Clancy did before the age of the internet. He had to do his research on topics by being in close proximity to a really good library. And to not have to go every day, he needed to organize his story ahead of time so he could go to a library and do his research and collect his research in as few trips as possible so he could come back and create and write. In the age of the internet, I'm so blessed, we're all so blessed to be able to fire up a search engine and begin to search things. And the process of researching for both Outflanked and the Iranian Fiasco, I would have tabs upon tabs of open up on my browser, searching around to find out all I could about locations, about food, about vehicles, or weaponry, or what have you. I want to create environments, so when I place my characters in the novels and in places, I want them to be real, where if somebody's familiar with the city, they'll go, I know that cafe. I've eaten at that restaurant. I've parked in that parking garage. I want that realism to come out. So like in the Iranian Fiasco, there's a motorcycle shop and, kind of on the outskirts of a small town in Western Iran. It exists. I found that motorcycle shop the way I describe it in my book. But if you're looking for that motorcycle shop, you'll be able to find it tomorrow if you happen to be in Western Iran. So I want to bring that degree of realism, and that requires a lot of trips to Google University to get my various education about the places, locations, equipment, tactics, all sorts of stuff.
I think that research is very important. because that's us anchor to certain points in the story. It makes it more real, more beautiful. And then there is the aspect of world building, which you have done fantastic, like with the characters, the continuation, the plot and everything. And do you want to share anything about your writing process, your writing discipline per se? Because you did write this book in a very short amount of time, and then you have been writing very steadily over the last few years. I'm curious to hear about what discipline you followed for your writing.
I can tell you, I am very free flowing in my writing. For me, it starts with the first word, and then it continues with the second word. I do not start with an outline. In fact, sometimes I don't even really know the story when I'm going. I kind of know a little bit about it, but as I go, I start thinking about where am I going to go with this story? What makes it compelling? So I do not create an outline ahead of time for the fiction books or the nonfiction books. I kind of, let it flow kind of organically. I want to start at the beginning and I want to have it make sense for somebody who might not have a background in it. So I get into the detail to start at the beginning, give the context, educate the reader enough so they know what's going on, whether it's a nonfiction book or a fiction book. The discipline I follow is to write every day. And there are days that, maybe I'm editing and I don't write. And then there's days like, last Sunday, a holiday, and, we had family over and I didn't write at all. But I try to set a goal of at least 500 words a day. And if you are someone who's thinking about becoming a writer, 500 words a day, in half a year, you have a book. Easy. And 500 words a day is not a lot to write. So, can I get through 500 words a day? Most of the times I get more than that. Today, 788 words. I know that exactly because I keep track of the words I write. I have an Excel spreadsheet, and this is the number of words I write today. So writing every day, moving the story along, but I don't use an outline. I like to let it flow organically. And, if I'm taking a walk, I'll think about my story and how do I want to advance it. If I'm sitting in the hot tub, I'll close my eyes and think, what's the world I want to build? What's the plot line that I want to move along? And I find myself many times making little course corrections. I'm thinking I'm going this way, but as I keep writing the story, like the Iranian Fiasco, I've got to move my characters from Eastern Iran to Western Iran. And it changes because I have to look at a map of Iran. And then I have to look at different cities and things like that. So quite literally, I'm learning about the country and realizing, we're going to have to go here. And so if I'm by this dried up lake, I should probably describe this dried up lake and a little bit about the history of this dried up lake. So that leads me to research for that. And when I started the book, I had no idea. I think it's a lake called Lake Urria, Urria. I don't know how to pronounce it. But, once I found my characters close to that, I felt compelled to describe the lake and the history of the lake and the like. So, it's kind of, I find it interesting. Hopefully readers find it interesting, but it's those things that kind of change where I think my story's headed to what actually appears on paper.
I am curious to understand, in context of this book, and you said you've done all this research and you found all the real places, but did you also have to speak to people or understand the culture to bring that in the story in any ways?
I try to throw in cultural aspects of it. So, describing homes and buildings, like in some places in Iran, particularly Qom, for example, a residence built within a wall, high walls, 3-meter tall walls, and not only just for a security perspective, but more so for privacy and to shield the public from any displays of abundant wealth or perhaps poverty, right? It's kind of like minding your own business with these walls. So describing not just the setting, the house, but the reason that there's these 3-meter walls around homes. I like to get into food and, the cultural aspects of food in different foreign countries. I like using the dialects in foreign language, so I will use, bits of, in the Iranian Fiasco, Farsi, for example, and then putting Farsi in the manuscript, and then, the translation of it, what it means in English for the English reader, right? It's maybe less cultural, but more historical. For example, Iran, pretty much leads the world in crossover vehicles that can use both gasoline and natural gas because they have tons of natural gas, abundant. So they've always been one of the leaders in having cars like that. So I want to describe that. It's really not, I don't think I wouldn't consider it cultural so much as maybe, kind of like historical or just additional knowledge about the society, about the country, about the city, or what have you. Whatever I'm in, I want to kind of throw that degree of education in, so when people are reading, they hopefully learn something.
We talked about your book, but also your inspiration, your writing journey, your disciplines, your research, and all of it that makes the next book possible. And to sort of conclude the discussion, and I know you already said this, like how you can sort of micro write to come up with a bigger goal, to go into long form writing. Is there anything you would like to share with anyone who wants to be a storyteller, who wants to publish a novel maybe someday?
One thing I like to tell storytellers is, just like I told my buddy Tom, by grabbing him on the shoulders before the first book, is, if not now, when? If you're thinking about being a storyteller, be this storyteller. If you want to be a writer, the first thing you got to do is write. And I find that the best way to write is to write a little bit every day, right? Don't need to go to a cabin in a mountain, get snowed in with a bunch of food and a bunch of wine, and write your book in a week, But what you can do is just knock out, 500, 600, 700 words a day, and in no time at all. If you're looking at a 65,000 word book, at 500 words a day, that's 130 days. Basically 4 months, you have a book ready to go. And then I like to tell storytellers, I just like to ask them, why do you want to tell your story? Is it to build your business? Is it to entertain folks? Are you doing it for yourself? First and foremost, I want you to do it for yourself. You want to create, right? That's great. If you want to share your story with others, it's going to be up to you to share your story with others. Writing the book, when you type in the words, the end at the bottom, that's not the end. Finishing your book is the new starting line for you. Now you need to get it published, and you have a lot of varieties to get your published, from traditional publishers to self-publishing to something in between called hybrid publishing. But even when your book becomes published, that's not the finish line. That is a new starting line, because after that, all of the marketing and promotion needs to be done by you, unless you're already a celebrity. If you are a celebrity, a publisher will perhaps do, marketing and promotion for you. Keep in mind, like a big publisher, someone like Simon & Schuster, they'll publish over 20,000 nonfiction books a year. That's just nonfiction. They don't have the bandwidth to promote your book, probably. If you're Michelle Obama writing an autobiography, okay, you're a celebrity, somebody known, they're going to sell a lot of books. You have to write. You have to start. Write every day. But when you're done with your manuscript, remember, that's not the end. That's a new beginning. Now you need to get it in other people's hands. You need to get it published. And once it gets published, it's still not the end. It's a new beginning, because all the marketing, all the promotion falls upon you. You need to make people become aware of it and consume your story. So you're not finished until you're never finished, but you're certainly not finished until the books are in people's hands, in front of their eyeballs, and able to read your story.
I would again like to request our listeners to take a look at the book. We have shared a snippet from the book, and you have gotten a chance to know about the amount of work that goes behind making a book possible. So I wish the book all the success, but I request all our listeners to take a look from the episode description. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience today?
I appreciate the opportunity to be on the show. I've enjoyed it very much. I do want to let the listeners and the watchers know that you can reach me on almost all social media platforms just with my name. My handle everywhere is Ray Hartjen, RayHartjen, and that's also my website. So if I want you to, feel free to reach out to me to social media, and I say that particularly if you, the listener or the watcher, happen to be a cancer patient. The online cancer community is vibrant. it's compassionate, it's considerate, it's empathetic. We're all in this together. We all get something, and we are in this together. So if there's ever if you are a patient, if you're a caregiver, if you are an ally, as somebody with cancer, multiple myeloma or not, and if there's anything that I can do for you, dear listener or watcher, viewer, please reach out to me via social. Reach out to me through my website.com. My email address is rayhartjen@gmail.com. Please reach out to me if there's anything I can do for you. It's my honor to connect with patients, caregivers from around the world. With my book, me, myself, and my multiple myeloma, I've had that privilege of connecting with people from Australia. I'm in Southern California. I've connected with people from Australia, New Zealand, Turkey, Egypt, Iran, Western Europe, and of course, all through the United States. And sincerely, it's been the honor of my life hearing their stories and working with them. So if there's ever anything I can do for you, please let me know.
Thank you so much. And thank you to our listeners once again.